Hi there. The purpose of today's PowerPoint presentation is to enable you to develop some depth in terms of your critical thinking about our novel Fates and Furies. You may or may not be aware that Fates and Furies has won a number of awards. It won a New York Times bestseller award, and it was also referred to by Barack Obama as his favorite and most intriguing novel of 2016. So, with that in mind, I wanted to bring you to a short PowerPoint presentation to help you to really zoom in on two different aspects of the novel. And this presentation goes hand in hand with the document that you'll find under the module for week 6. The document is called our Literary Terms and Types document. And this document provides really a lot of the language that students in English use to better understand or dig into a book, such as basic plot structure, character, setting. So this document, even though it looks a bit intimidating, there's a lot of information there, can be very helpful to us when we want to better understand our novels, and when we want to better understand things as simple as films, television series, plays, what have you. So I'm going to ask that you devote some time to studying this document. Much of it is very straightforward, and some of it will become a bit more apparent through the course of this short PowerPoint video. So I'm not going to take too much of your time here, but I do want to zoom in on a couple of items. So please get comfortable and turn to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, welcome back. In order to really get at a sense of character, to really understand both Lotto and Mathilde and the other characters in the novel, I want to start by talking about point of view. By this point, reading the novel, you've recognized that our author, Lauren Groff, uses a third person, somewhat omniscient narrator to tell the story of Fates and Fury. So in part one, Fates were given the story with an emphasis on Lotto's experiences, but in part two, Furies were given the story with an emphasis on Mathilde, formerly known as Arlie, were given this perspective on her experiences. So we might ask ourselves about the system of alternate viewpoints. Um, if you've read other fiction, contemporary fiction, you might think of this as really a familiar style of narration. You see it in novels like The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, and there are several others that are bestsellers. The Woman in Cabin 10 is another that comes to mind, that rely upon this alternate system of narration. And we have to ask ourselves, why is the author breaking a novel down into two different parts, sometimes even three different parts? Um, does this style of narration contribute to your appreciation of character? It might be that given the intimate details shared by the narrator, first of Lotto's life and then of Mathilde's life, that we get to understand or have more compassion toward these characters. We have to ask ourselves also, is this style of narration compelling? Does it seem worthwhile? If you only read the first half of the novel, you get a very different sense of what happens in the marriage between Lotto and Mathilde than if you read it through its completion. I like that Lauren Groff doesn't seem to privilege a singular perspective. She seems to be creating empathy and understanding for both characters. So I think that knowing this deliberate attempt by Lauren Groff to give us background or insight into both of the characters through these two different alternate perspectives really allows us a much fuller appreciation for them as characters in the novel. So I don't know about you, but my character list goes on and on for pages. I tried to capture even the minor characters and something about each one as I read the novel. As I read, I found myself developing this affinity toward not only Lotto and Mathilde, but also some of the minor characters as well. Perhaps you, as you read, resisted or even, detested a character, a whole group of characters. I know that Antoinette refers to Lotto's early childhood friends as the delinquents, and she wants us, I think, to maybe recognize them for being flawed characters. Is that something that we can, do we overcome our resistance to those characters, or do we tend to, pigeonhole them like Antoinette does during the course of the text? I think it's a personal choice as we read, but certainly there are redeeming characters characteristics to people like Charlie and Danica. Um, so why are, the next question that I'm going to ask is, why are the characters crafted as they are? So for this next bit of explanation, let's go to the next slide. Okay, welcome back. So about character. Character in Fates and Furies is very interesting. In fact, Barack Obama referred to it as intriguing. One element of the contemporary novel is that the plots become more slice of life plots where there is no dramatic point of climax or crisis as much as the novel is about instead character analysis or getting to really know these fully developed, very dynamic characters. So if I were to think carefully about Fates and Furies, I would suggest that the novel is not plot driven as much as it is driven by an analysis of character and a representation of character. So, in a character driven novel, we want to examine all the details related to character. And we want to consider, for instance, Lotto is a well-rounded character. The narrator reveals him early on in the text as, quote, the one we can't look away from. He is the shining one, end of quote. That comes from page 6. It's hard to resist Lotto. He seems really interesting and very well loved by his oldest of friends. They're loyal to him. They guard and protect him just as his mother, his family, Sally, and his sister do. Um, you know, it seems to me that as we read through the novel, Lotto is longing for this sense of certainty, a sense of his identity. He's chasing one vision of himself after another. And it just seems that as soon as he starts to identify with one role, that role comes to an end and he begins this kind of fledgling behavior trying to grope toward the next point of stasis in his life. Um, as soon as we finish Lotto's section, we're plunged into Matilda's section. And Matilda's section is even more difficult to read than I think Lotto's section. I believe that she has a lot of negative characteristics, but those really come into perspective when you begin to recognize the narrator's unfolding of all these moments of trauma. We discover that as an early child, at a very young age, she's abandoned by her parents. And we can appreciate, as we get into her section, the female rage that she experiences through her marriage with Lotto, and then through um, her life of independence after his death. Some of us find her easier to like or to understand than others. But it's important to think about why she makes the choices that she makes. Ultimately, she makes a number of big mistakes. But I ask you, as you read the novel and think about the novel, to consider whether or not her end result with Charlie is the result of love. This is, after all, a class that examines the love between beings. And I want you to think about and consider whether or not she's redeemed for all of those flaws by her final act of what some people read as inaction, other people read as sacrifice. So lots to think about as we consider character. Certainly, there's something to be said for why the characters are given these names: Lotto, formerly Lancelot, and RLA, who changes her name to Mathilde, and then also to think about the relevance of calling part one Fates and part two Furies. These characters are, if you haven't noted already, very dynamic and interesting and round characters. And it's important to note how they interact with others as well as what they think. Um, anyway, I hope that you like this short PowerPoint. I look forward to reading your responses to the novel as you carefully process all these different elements provided for you on the literary terms and types handout. Thanks for your time today.